Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. I know, at least in our family, we have children starting school on Zoom and trying to figure out how to balance our lives and the lives of our kids. So some of you may be in the same boat with children or grandchildren. So what I would like to do today is to begin with some high holiday material. So far we've been doing some basic grammar, working on some of the more common prayers. And today I want to focus on two specific prayers, although there's a question of whether one of them is really a prayer. We'll talk about that. And get a feel for the content and what's going on in these. Look at a few of the challenges in reading these aloud, and then we'll have the recordings of this session up at myjewishlearning.com, and we will have additional audio to practice reading, and the text and exercises and the PowerPoint available later today. So I am going to begin by sharing my screen. And the two prayers we're going to look at today are, first of all, the one that goes Adonai, Adonai el Rachum v'Chanun. And that one is repeated several times over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I thought that that might be a good one to kind of have in your pocket. And the other one is the very famous Kol Nidre that gets Yom Kippur started. So I am going to pop my screen open here. Let's see if we can get this large. All right, so Hebrew for the high holidays. So we are going to start with this text, Adonai, Adonai, el Rachum ve'Chanun. And I'm going to start first by reading it and then talking a little bit about this prayer. So it goes as follows: Adonai, Adonai, and just a reminder, the Yud Yud is an abbreviation for Yud He Vav He, the divine name. So Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, Verav Chesed Ve'emet. Notzer Chesed La'alafim, Nosei Avon, Vafesha, Vechata'a, Venake. So the first thing that I want to say about this, apart from the fact that it will appear several times during the course of the high holidays, is that this is also recited during Slichot, right before Rosh Hashanah, and there are some other holidays in which this is recited. So it's not just Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So let's talk about, first of all, what these words are, what they mean, and then I'll give you a little bit more information about this. So we have Adonai, Adonai. These are like vocatives, O Adonai, O Adonai. And then El Rachum V'Chanun. El means God and is often used as a lower G, God. Rachum is connected to the word Rachamim. So Rachamim is kind of compassion. So El Rachum, a compassionate God. V'Chanun, and one who is like filled with grace. And then Erech Apayim literally means Um, uh, let's see, long-standing nose. So going, what does that mean? So the word apayim comes from the word af, aleph and fe, and af is one's nose. So there are idioms in the Bible that refer to God's anger and God's compassion by using idioms that include nose. So when God is very angry, it is common to have expressions like chara af, that God's nose is aflame, right? Almost like dragon imagery. Or, I remember being a kid, my father getting angry and seeing that, that nose, those nostrils go. So, erech apayim is, means kind of like long-lasting patience. Verav, so rav is much, a lot. And then we know these two words, chesed ve'emet. Chesed is, so God is filled with chesed, loving kindness, ve'emet, emet being truth. Again, we've had these in prior weeks. Then notzer chesed la'alafim. Alafim means thousands. So elef means 1,000. So alafim means thousands, and this is going to refer to thousands of generations. So notzer chesed la'alafim is basically like God is one who extends chesed, loving kindness, la'alafim, to the thousands generation is implied, even though the word generation is not here. Then noseh comes from a verb nasa. Nasa means to lift up or to carry. So God is the one who, noseh, who carries or lifts up. And then the next three words are all different words for wickedness, evil, sinfulness, bad things. All right. So the first one, avon, it's important to notice for those of you who are newer to reading Hebrew, that it's very common when people see this word to read aon as two syllables, a and then on. Now, this is incorrect. And part of the reason that you can kind of remember it's incorrect is because every single syllable has to begin with a consonant. It has to have a consonant. And you can't have two vowels in a row without a consonant in there, which means if this is a, with the ayin and this kamas, then it means the next thing we encounter is going to be a consonant. So here we're going to pronounce the vav. So it's going to be avon. So vav and the dot here as the vowel telling us O, and the nun sofit. So avon. And again, it's because you can never have two vowels in a row, so you cannot say aon. All right. So avon is generally translated as like wickedness. Then the next word, pesha, is often translated as transgression. And then vechata'a and you are likely to see this word more often in the high holidays than the others. Chata'a is a sin. And so there are a lot of prayers around the high holidays where you'll encounter chatati, I have sinned. And that is simply the verbal form, chatati, I have sinned. Or chatanu, we have sinned. And here, chata'a is the noun, so a sin. And then finally, vinakeh, it has a sense of kind of cleaning the slate, kind of erasing, clearing something out. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this text is that it is actually taken, this is an excerpt taken from Torah. So most of the prayers and the blessings in our Sidurim and in our high holiday Machzor were composed by rabbis of different ages. And over centuries and centuries and centuries, eventually all of these were put together and we got our Sidurim, our prayer books. From time to time, the rabbis would bring in quotations or psalms from the Bible. And this is one such text. So this is biblical, and we actually encounter it like 6 times in the Bible. It appears in the prophets, it appears in the book of Psalms, it appears in Torah. The very first time that this appears is in the book of Exodus, chapter 34. And Exodus 34 is Moses's second round of getting the tablets. So if you recall, the community gathers at Sinai, meets God, Moses goes up, gets the 10 commandments, and as Moses is descending, he looks down and sees the Israelite camp, and they are worshiping a golden calf. And Moses gets so angry with the community that he smashes the tablets on the ground. And so he needs, after the whole golden calf fiasco is ended with, unfortunately, a lot of violence, then Moses goes back up in chapter 34 of Exodus to get kind of the second copy. And before God begins to talk about the laws again, we hear God introducing God's self to Moses again. And the way that God introduces God's self is with these words. So God's self, is speaking these words. So we have God who is saying, Adonai, Adonai, referring to God's self, and kind of describing the characteristics, almost as if saying to Moses, before we start talking about specific laws and customs, let me just give you a little bit more information about who I am and what my primary characteristics are. And so this will appear in Exodus. It appears again in the book of Numbers. And as I said before, the prophets quote this, and it appears in the Psalm. So it's clear that this was a well-known text among our ancestors, the ancient Israelites. Now, the rabbis picked up on this text, and they got that there was something very, very important about this verse in Torah. And so they began to develop a concept that this text that we have in front of us provides the key 13 attributes of the God of Israel. The 13 midot, kind of characteristics of God. Maimonides was the ones who kind of most fully lay this out. And so let me show you what they did. So they took each word, sometimes a phrase if something goes together, and they found 13 components in here. In Judaism, 13 is a good number. Okay, right? Bar mitzvah, 13, we like 13s. So they took, let me go back. They took each of the words or phrases into 13 parts and interpreted each one as revealing a characteristic of God or a principle by which God interacts with humanity. So the first thing is, well, why does it say Adonai twice? Well, because the first time is Adonai, it's describing God's compassion before a person sins. And then it's repeated again because the second represents God's compassion after a person has sinned. Then the next word we get in the text is El, God, and they interpret El to express the idea of God is mighty in compassion to give all creatures according to their need. Then Rahum describes God as merciful, that this is one of the guiding principles that God uses. Hanun, gracious, and again, merciful, so that human beings do not have to be distressed, so preventative. And then if they are in distress, then gracious about it. So our before and after. Erech Aphaim, slow to anger. Verav Chesed, plenteous in kindness. Ve'emet, God works with the principle of truth. Notzer Chesed la'alafim, another principle that God works with is keeping kindness unto thousands, so that one's good deeds can have an impact for 1,000 generations. Then number 10, Nosei Avon, that God forgives iniquity and God forgives transgression and God forgives sin. And finally, V'nakeh, and God is a pardoning God. And so once the rabbis developed this, you could imagine all sorts of commentaries and embellishments on, well, what does this really, really mean? And what do we learn about God? But if you ever hear about the 13 midot, this is the text that, the interpretation of the text that is being referred to here. Okay, I'm going to stop share for just a moment, see if there are any pressing questions before I move on to the next piece.
We had a question for hints as to how to distinguish nouns from verbs.
There's no easy answer. It has to do with the vowel patterns that are attached to root letters. It is something that I offer as a teaching elsewhere that I will kind of tell you about in the exercises and the supplementary material. Okay. But it takes more time, and there's no easy answer to that question. Okay. Anything else before we continue?
Do you speak French by any chance?
Do I speak French?
Someone was wondering about the relationship between fesha and pesca in French. I don't speak French, so I might be pronouncing that wrong.
I can read and translate French if it's about biblical studies, but otherwise I don't speak French. So I am not sure. There are a number of words from the Bible that made it into Greek and Latin, and then kind of trickle down into the Romance languages. Yain, wine, is one of them.
Great. I think that's all for the questions now.
All right, great. All right, so now we're going to go to Kol Nidre. Now, Kol Nidre is a tough one. There's just no getting around it. I have it here all in one place, but we're going to break it up in a moment. So Kol Nidre is the very beginning of Yom Kippur, before the rest of the evening service. This appears immediately, and it is traditional for the cantor, the chazan, whoever is kind of leading the musical part of the service, to sing through this 3 times. And we might think, oh, we're going 3 times because this is such a key text and we want to emphasize it. The origin actually of 3 times is to allow anyone who got to shul a few minutes late to still hear it. So that's the origin of why it's repeated 3 times. So if you're running a little late, you still get to hear this, because hearing and participating in this is considered extremely important. Depending on the community that you're involved with, most of the time you'll hear something that begins with like Kol Nidre v'sarei v'charamei. So you may recognize it from the tune. Now, before we kind of jump into this, if you take just a few minutes to just even randomly look at a few words in here and look at things that we find at the end or perhaps at the beginning. And you may notice things like, why is it nidre, ve'esare? What are all these A endings? Or you may notice that there are a lot of words that have an aleph at the end, a lot more often than we have seen. So this is a sign that this particular prayer is not written solely in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic. The most famous prayer that is written in Aramaic is the Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish, when the Kaddish is repeated, Yikadal B'Kadash Shmei Rabbah. So that is also written in Aramaic. You might want to take a look at it at some point and see if you can see some of the same patterns here and in the Kaddish. So let's begin by kind of breaking this down into more manageable pieces. So it begins with the following, and first I'll just read it, and again, I'll have a recording of this available with the exercises, so you can listen to it as much as you'd like. So we have Kol Nidre ve'esarei v'charamei ve'konamei ve'chinuyei ve'kinusei u'shavuot. Now, basically, what this is saying, kol, we know, we've covered already, every, or all. Nidre, a neder, is a vow. This word is the same in Hebrew and in Aramaic. A neder is a vow. So basically, all of the rest of the words in this list are other synonyms, other words for vows, an oath, a promise. But you don't have to worry about learning what each specific one means, because you're unlikely to encounter these words anywhere else except in this one text. So just to know that as the cantor or congregation is singing all of this, you're basically saying for all of the oaths and vows and promises and oaths and vows and whatever words you want to use, that these are all just a list of different kinds. Okay. Now, the reason that we have this A ending over and over again is because of the Aramaic. If we were in Hebrew, we would say Kol Nidre, or im ending for masculine plural nouns. So this is, imagine in Hebrew, we would have im at the end instead of a at the end. And if you find that these words are a little harder to read aloud, you're in very, very good company, because it's in Aramaic. While Aramaic and Hebrew are both closely related Semitic languages, even a few changes can make things a little more challenging. All right, the next part then reads as follows. Din darna u de ish tebana acharimna vedaasarna al nafshatana, and we'll end right here. So these words, all of these words here, from the first, the second, the third, and the fourth, are all verbs that correspond with the nouns that we just saw. So for all the different words for vows and oaths, now we're seeing those which we have vowed, which we have promised, which we have made an oath about, which we have resolved. So you will see these are simply the verbal analogs to the nouns at the beginning. And then al, upon, nafshatana. You may see in here the word nefesh, meaning soul or self. In Aramaic, this na is similar to what we've encountered nu in Hebrew. So if I wanted to say in Hebrew, our souls or ourselves, I would say nafshenu. In Aramaic, instead of nu, you get the nun and the aleph, and this means our. So, right, the things that we have done, so al nafshatanu, nafshatana, that we have taken upon our souls. Okay, so again, regarding any oath, any vows, any promises, any kind of contract, any setting of expectations, which we have vowed and promised and so and so and so upon ourselves. And now we can move on. Miyom, and here we have a little slice of Hebrew. Miyom kippurim zeh ad yom kippurim haba aleinu l'tova. So regarding all of those vows that we've made, miyom, here is our preposition min, from, that we have seen. Yom is day. So from the day of Kippurim, of Kippur, so from Yom Kippur, basically, which one? From this Yom Kippur, ad Yom Kippurim haba, until the Yom Kippur haba that is coming next year. And then a wish, aleinu l'tova, may it be all for good. Okay, but keep in mind that the text is saying from this Yom Kippur, in which we are reciting this, to next year's Yom Kippur, what are we asking of God? Basically, and again, the same, different words for the same synonyms. May they be nullified, voided, forgiven, again, all, as many synonyms as you can come up with. So kulhon is like kol, like all of them. And then it just goes through. May all of these things be forgiven. So that it is as if la kayamin, that they never even existed. So in other words, God, in the coming year, whenever I make a promise, whenever I make a commitment, whenever I take an oath or make a vow, please consider it as if it doesn't really exist, as if I didn't really do that, as if I didn't really make that promise. Okay, this is pretty radical. The word here, vela, the Hebrew equivalent is lo, not, or no. So in Hebrew, it is lo, and in Aramaic, it is la. And then our final part, nidrana, our vows, la nidre, are not really vows. Ve'esarana, la esare, and our, again, resolves, commitments, are not really commitments. Ushvu'atana, and our, na, and our promises, la shavuot, aren't really promises. Not really promises. Okay. So let me say a few more words about this. When you really think about what the text is saying that for the coming year, so looking forward, not looking past, for the coming year, please God, understand that anytime I make a vow or a promise or a commitment, it's really not that. Please consider it as if I didn't make a commitment, as if I didn't make a vow. Because in Jewish tradition, swearing an oath or making a vow is considered very, very serious. And there is an expectation that when you make a promise, you absolutely keep that promise. And that if you do not keep that promise, then you are desecrating the name of God. Okay? That it is an insult to God every time we make a promise and we do not fulfill that promise. Right? Or we vow something and don't do it. However, our ancestors and the rabbis knew that it is in human nature to make promises rashly, or to make promises and forget about them, to lose track, that it's just in human nature not necessarily to follow through with absolutely everything we say, I promise. And so this text becomes a way of knowing even ahead of time that we are not going to be desecrating God's name. We will not be insulting God if we can't fulfill that promise. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of rabbis did not want this in the Machzor. It really took a long time to get Kol Nidre worked into the high holiday prayers. Because you can see what some people would say. Well then, what good is making a promise? If I'm saying right now, don't hold me accountable for anything that I promise, Don't hold me accountable for any oath that I take, right? That doesn't feel good, right? So a lot of rabbis were like, no, we're not, we're not putting this out there. Then, then it means nothing. All of this becomes meaningless. The knowledge of this text among Christian circles also had a negative impact because Christians use this text to say, see, you can't trust the word of a Jew because they're asking to be absolved of anything beforehand. And so part of the way that Kol Nidre then made it into the high holiday prayers is by narrowing its interpretation so that all of these vows and oaths and promises that we're making that are referred to in Kol Nidre only refer to oaths between us and God, personal. So if I have promised any other human being something, I'm accountable. Reciting Kol Nidre does not let me off the hook. It is specifically if I make a vow to God, if I promise God that I will do something and I don't, then this is, the Kol Nidre is about trying to get absolution for that. Okay. There are still arguments and conversations about whether Kol Nidre is cleaning the slate of last year, but the text seems to be looking forward and proactively seeking forgiveness from God for anything that we promise God and don't keep ahead of time. Okay? So we will have in the exercises recordings of both Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, which will appear several times through the holidays, and the one-time Kol Nidre, which gets things started. The last piece that I'll share with you is that it's pretty much a misnomer to call Kol Nidre a prayer. The structure fits more into the language of legal contracts. And it's almost as if this text is based on laws and legal documents. So it's almost as if we start Yom Kippur in this virtual divine court, appealing to God as the judge and prosecutor and presenting our case. And then from Kol Nidre, then we move into more standard blessings and prayers. All right, so that is basically it for today. On the exercises, I've given you a list of about four pieces of Aramaic that you might encounter a lot, like in the Kaddish, to help you understand what's going on there. So some of the most prominent differences between Hebrew and Aramaic I have laid out in a text for you. All right, if we have time, take a couple of questions for today.
Okay, great. There are a number of questions kind of around the same issue, so I'm going to distill it into one question, which is, could you address maybe historically Aramaic and why some of these prayers are in Aramaic as opposed to Hebrew, and they share the same letters, and sort of questions around Aramaic?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, great questions. The biblical texts were written primarily in Hebrew. If you look at some of the latest biblical texts, the ones that were written at the end of the biblical period, like the book of Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, you'll see that already in those texts, there's a lot of Aramaic in them. They're not just written in Hebrew. They're written in a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic. because around the time that the texts were kind of codified, Aramaic was the lingua franca of Jews. Jews spoke Aramaic. We're not even sure, or not convinced, that most Jews even understood Hebrew, because we have something called the Targum, which is a translation of the Bible from Hebrew into Aramaic. Why do you need a translation into Aramaic? And this is around the time of the Second Temple period. This is around the time of the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, the birth of Christianity. So the language that people used from day to day was Aramaic, and it would only be the folks who were most educated who would have still understood Hebrew. And so, and Aramaic was used most of the Talmud, but the Palestinian and the Babylonian Talmuds are written in a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic, because Aramaic was the spoken language, and remained so for a few hundred years. That's why some of our prayers are in Aramaic.
Thank you. We have a technical question about the exercises, that some people are having trouble printing them. Do you have suggestions? Can you print the exercises?
Everything, you should be able to download everything. The exercises and the PowerPoints I convert into PDF documents, and you should be able to download them. And when you look at the screen, you see the PDF, you see the material. Go down below that, and at the bottom, you'll see a place where you can link, a little link where if you click, it will download it onto your computer. And then you have it on your computer as a PDF. And then if it doesn't print out from the PDF, I don't know why.
Great. Biblical professor and tech wizard. Thank you. A few people are asking also about a link between Kol Nidre and the Inquisition and forced conversion, that they'd heard that there was a connection there.
Yes. So there has been a theory for several generations that this text did emerge within the Spanish Jewish community around the times of the Inquisition. In more recent years, most of the leading scholars of Jewish prayer books no longer believe that's true. They think that the text is earlier, but just because it appears a lot in rabbinic discussions about whether this is a good text or a bad text. Should we use it? Should we not use it? So it took a while to make it into the Machzor, but it seems that the leading scholars believe now that it's earlier than that.